Hey there, welcome to Mike's Collection, episode 168. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today is some of my new Spawn figures. Now, if you watch my videos regularly, you might be thinking, didn't we just do this? And yes, in my last video, I did just review some new Spawn figures. So, just to give you a little bit of background, Spawn is a comic book character created by Todd McFarlane back in 1992. Then in 1994, Todd McFarlane started his own toy company, McFarlane Toys, and he started making action figures of Spawn, and I was right on board with both the comic book and the toys back in the early 90s. But as the years went on, he kind of shifted focus from Spawn toys into other brands like Halo and Walking Dead, and it took a long time, took about 20 years, but I eventually lost interest in the comic book too. So for the last few years, I haven't been paying that close attention to Spawn. But the brand has kind of had a bit of a resurgence lately. The comic book has been given some new focus, and Todd McFarlane has launched a couple of kind of sister titles to the main Spawn book. So now we have Spawn, we have King Spawn, which is another book about the main guy, Al Simmons. But then we also have Gunslinger Spawn, which is a book about a different character who's got the same powers as Spawn, essentially. And then we have another book, which is a team book called The Scorched. And this is about a bunch of the kind of side characters in Spawn's universe now all working together. One of them being She-Spawn, who's like the leader of the team. Another one being Gunslinger Spawn, who's the guy I mentioned, who's also got his own book. And then we also have the Redeemer. And who else is in there? There's a couple other characters that I imagine this team book is probably going to cycle through a few of them. It's Medieval Spawn is the other character that's in the book currently. But there's also some side characters like Cygor, the cyborg gorilla. Haunt is another character that's kind of been floating around this book. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some lineup changes in that book as it goes on. Anyway, so I've started reading the Spawn comic books again, and they've been pretty exciting. And right around the same time, McFarlane Toys has launched a new line of Spawn figures. And I initially wasn't going to get into collecting the Spawn figures, but by reading the comic book, it kind of makes me excited about the characters, and it makes me want the toys. And, that's how this whole thing goes. So I bought a couple of the Spawn figures, and that was kind of my way of sampling the line to say, like, am I gonna keep buying these? So I had a few of them, and I opened them and I reviewed them in kind of real time for you guys in my last video just a couple of days ago. And basically I concluded at the end of that video that yes, I like these toys and I will probably get some more of them. So I knew two of the figures that were readily available to me because I've seen them in my local GameStop stores were the Violator and the Clown. So both versions of this character. You could get the little short squatty clown guy, which I've never really liked, so I decided I'm not going to get the Clown. But then the Violator, I've always thought he was cool, but this new Violator is like really big and muscular. He's not this like wiry, kind of creepy demon like this guy is. So, I wasn't super sold on the new look. I really kind of like the uniqueness of this guy being all like long and wiry. But, it was a cool looking figure. But another deterrent for me not buying that figure is it was like $75. In Canada, these figures here, the standard figures, are like $30. So all three figures that I reviewed for you in the last video, they were $30 figures. But it was a big commitment to buy a $75 Violator. And because this figure is still so cool, I didn't know if I really needed to replace him, at least not at that price. However, I was online looking to see like what other Spawn figures were maybe available to pre-order online. And I found out that there was a bloody variant of the new Violator. So it's still the same big hulking figure, except now he's got all this blood spatter painted on him. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. And if I got the blood spatter version, that would kind of differentiate him from this figure, besides the bulk, but just the gore as well would kind of make him feel different. That might seem like a silly justification for buying it, but for me, sometimes I need just a little bit of justification to warrant buying the same character again, and it doesn't take much. So in this case, I was like, you know what? I wouldn't pay $75 for the standard version, but I would pay it maybe for the bloody version. However, this bloody version that I just learned about was an exclusive, and it was sold out on the websites where it was available. So I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to get the bloody one. So maybe next time I'm in store, I'll pick up the standard one without the blood. Anyway, I went out today, and to my surprise, my local GameStop had the bloody Violator. So here he is. It might be a little hard to see it while he's in the packaging here. But yeah, you can see he's got blood spattered on his legs, on his hands, on his horns here. So pretty cool. And I think you can see this is a big box. So it's got some cool artwork there on the side. Picture of the toy on the back. Another picture there. So yeah, big toy. And so as I mentioned, this guy was $75 in the standard like gray color scheme. And I was prepared to pay that. To my surprise, this guy here was actually cheaper. You see he's listed at $66. So about $10 less for some reason. And if you have a membership with GameStop, you actually get the member's price, which I have. So I got him for $60. So he was $15 less than I expected. Plus, it's the rare variant that I didn't think I was going to get. So this was a pretty cool surprise today. So I'm pretty happy about that. We're going to pop him open in a second and take a look. But the other one I found, I was also surprised about because I didn't think this figure was out yet. This is, I guess, what you would call a Wave 2 figure. And I haven't seen much of them online other than pre-orders. Usually in Canada, I'm kind of the last guy to get a figure. So when there's a figure I want, I see it all over Instagram. I see reviews on all the websites. Now, I haven't really been looking for reviews, so maybe other people have this. But this is pretty new to me. This is She-Spawn. So this is one of the characters I was pretty excited to track down because she's so prominently featured in the new comic book, especially Scorched. So, again, some cool artwork of She-Spawn on the side there. Picture of the figure on the back. Now you'll notice this is a pretty standard size figure. She's about the same size. If anything, she's smaller because she's a woman and she's a little bit more petite than the other characters I reviewed in my last video, like Redeemer and Gunslinger Spawn. But you'll notice the price tag on her, $56, $51 with the discount. So why is she so expensive? It's because she comes in this big ridiculous box and they call her a deluxe figure. Now mind you, she does have a lot of weapons. You'll see she's got a big gun here, another gun here, sword, another big gun with a chain wrapped around it, big axe, and then a couple other little things in there. It looks like a different hand and a display base in the back. But, you know, an average figure usually comes with an accessory or two. So if she was a $30 figure, she probably would have come with this stuff. So I'm basically paying the extra $20 for 2 more guns and a sword, which I'll probably never use. You know, usually I arm my figures with whatever they can hold. She's got 2 hands. I'll give her a gun and a sword. And the rest of the stuff is going to go in my spare parts bin and I'll probably never see it again. So it's a little frustrating to pay a big price on a little figure. Like Violator, it seems warranted. Like, I don't like paying that much for a figure, but this is a big, heavy, bulky figure. He's bigger than the other figures I have. This one here, when she goes on my shelf, she's not going to look like I should have spent $50 on her because she's a pretty standard, you know, 6-7 inch figure. Anyway, pretty stoked to find both of these guys. So I guess now we're going to open them up and take a look at them. So here is the Violator outside of the box. And this guy is big. If you watched my last video about the other Spawn figures, my main complaint about Spawn figures in general, and really it's a bit of a broader issue, it's about McFarlane Toys in general because his DC line has the same problem, is the scale. These figures are too big. So when I was reviewing Gunslinger Spawn and Redeemer, I had a little bit of trouble fitting them on screen because I don't have a very wide desk here, so it's hard for me to have the space to cover such a tall figure. Now this guy here, the scale doesn't bother me. Like, for example, if you look at this figure next to, say, a 6-inch G.I. Joe figure, this guy towers over him, but this is supposed to be a big giant monster. So this guy actually, I still feel these guys are to scale with one another. It doesn't look off. So I'm okay with the scale of this guy. So no complaints regarding that. It's just that it's really hard for me to fit him on camera here. So I've got my camera propped up, and I still can't quite get him all on screen here. But yeah, it's a big, big toy. And it still feels pretty heavy outside of the box. This guy's definitely got some weight to him. So let's start with looking at the sculpt. So we'll get up nice and close. So this looks like the Violator that I grew up with. You know, he's got those distinctive, like those 3 curved horns that kind of close in around his face. He's got his big jaw hanging out, you know, so he has a severe underbite. When he closes his mouth, it almost doesn't make sense that his lower jaw comes out this far here. You know, it's more reminiscent of the old Violator than I actually realized. I thought he was much bigger and more muscular, which he is, but it's not so crazy that it doesn't feel like Violator anymore. He still kind of has that similar stance, but he's definitely beefed himself up a little bit. So another one of my first impressions about this guy is that his joints are a little loose in some spots, which isn't great because it's such a big, heavy figure. He needs solid joints to be able to stand up properly. So the problems I have are around his legs. So like let's look at his articulation here. So you see he's got a joint here, and then another joint here. So you can kick that ankle out some. Then another joint here, and you can see it doesn't wobble so much, but it's really loose. So if I want to bend that and have him hold his weight, that seems to kind of buckle under the weight of this figure. He's also got a joint there with a good range of movement, I guess. He can get his legs out to the side pretty good. Can kick it forward pretty good. Now there's a joint along here and along here. So these are like 3 separate pieces. It may be kind of hard to tell that, but I don't think he doesn't have a ton of movement in the ab crunch there. So there's not a ton of movement as far as spinning him or crunching him. The arms, so you can see the joint there. So big ball joint on the arm, so good range of movement there. Joint at the elbow. It looks to be a single. See, there's not enough room here. Single jointed elbow, and that's pretty stiff. Having a little trouble there. But the other figures had double jointed elbows, so single jointed for this guy. And then you can see he's got a pretty big joint there on his hand, so he should be able to move his hand quite a bit. Although, yeah, so you see that comes back pretty far. I mentioned this on the other Spawn figures as well, is these figures are kind of sharp to touch. So as I hold this guy and try and move his hand, these little spikes all over the back of his knuckles and stuff, they kind of hurt my hand to hold down on. So same articulation over on this hand. Now the head, the jaw here seems to move, but so it opens pretty low like that, but I don't think I can get it to come all the way up. I don't want to force it, but yeah, I don't think I can get it to come completely level. And he doesn't seem to really turn at the head very much. You can see there's a seam there. Again, I apologize for the lighting here, but yeah, the seam, not a whole lot of movement there. So better than old McFarlane toys for sure. You can see he's got quite a lot of joints, but he's still not super posable. All right, so cool figure, but I don't know if he'll be able to hold up his own weight all the time. Now, if we compare him, so this is the other Violator figure that I had around, which I still think is an incredible figure. This looks great. This looks how he looked just like out of the comic books. And see, I like how he can close his jaw right up to the top there, which I'm not 100% certain this guy can't do. Maybe I just need to work those joints a little bit more. But yeah, pretty cool. Like, this is a character, you know, he's been around since the very first issues of Spawn. He's very cool. He's got 2 different forms. He's got his demonic Violator form, which I always thought was awesome. And then he turns into the short, squatty clown, which I never really liked. Now, the first pass that Todd McFarlane made at a Violator figure was pretty bad. They made him with kind of like out of soft rubber with wires through his arms and legs so you could bend him, but it felt more like a dollar store toy. It was pretty cheap. And even though I liked the character, I passed on that initial figure because I kind of held out hope that they would make a better version down the road. And they certainly did. I think this is only the second version of Violator they put out. There was also a version of Violator based on the live-action movie, which was a vast improvement over the rubbery wire one. That one might have come out before this one. But regardless, I've had this figure for like 20 years, thereabouts. And it's a cool figure. I still keep him on display in my cabinet. I was actually going to bring out my other Spawn figures that I just reviewed in my last episode, like Gunslinger Spawn, to do a size comparison here. But I don't think I'm going to bother. My toy room here has been a mess for months. Ever since before Christmas, I've had toys piled up everywhere. And just yesterday, I decided to do a big clean, and I put everything away. And so my Spawn figures, they're off in another room that you guys don't usually get to see. They're off in my den, and I have them displayed in some of these IKEA, like Detolf glass cabinets. And they're not difficult to get to, but those Detolf cabinets, sometimes when I open them up and they're magnetic doors, they rattle, and sometimes the figures inside come tumbling down. And I was dealing with that a little bit yesterday when I was putting them away, and I really don't want to go back in there and start pulling the figures out again. So for comparison, Cobra Commander will have to do, and you can also see the size of him compared to, say, She-Spawn, who we're going to take a look at in more detail in a minute. But he is quite a bit bigger than these other McFarlane figures. So, very cool figure. I hesitate to say an improvement over this one because I like the overall look of this guy better, but this one is definitely more articulated. This guy, he's got joints, but see, like his legs, you can't make him stand upright. Like, that's kind of sculpted like that. And you can turn his feet, but not in ways that really make him easier to pose. It's just kind of a joint for the sake of a joint. So this guy's cool, but he doesn't move very much. This guy seems like he moves a lot more. And, if you like your demons big and muscular, then that's probably the way to go. But the cool thing about these guys is Violator had a number of brothers as demons. They were all lesser characters. They weren't featured very prominently. But I can display these guys together in my collection, and I don't necessarily feel like I've got two Violators. I can kind of, in my own head, justify that this is a different character. This is one of the other demonic brothers. And so, yeah, they look pretty cool together. So, again, the lighting is pretty bad here as I try and show this guy off. But, yeah, he's cool. And you can see the blood. So this is what differs from the other version. I think the figure is the exact same otherwise, like the same base color and everything. I could be wrong on that. The other version could be maybe a lighter gray or something. I definitely am not going to pick up the other one, considering the price of these figures. But of the two, I am glad I got the bloody version. I think that does add a little bit to the figure, and I think he's pretty cool. So, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about the Violator. Now here is She-Spawn outside of the box. So this is another character. I'm not going to try to explain her whole history. Even though I have read almost every one of the 300 Spawn comics, I have a gap of about 25 of them where I quit collecting for a couple of years. I've also read a lot of the spin-offs, like I read the whole Curse of the Spawn series, and some of the various other mini-series. So I'm pretty well versed in Spawn, but I haven't reread any of that stuff since I initially bought it. So trying to remember the history of some of these characters, it can be pretty tough. Because one thing I have to credit Todd McFarlane and the other writers of Spawn is that they don't go back to the same well very often. Like if you read Spider-Man comic books, he fights his same villains pretty much every year. You're going to see Sandman, the Vulture, Dr. Octopus over and over and over again. But with Spawn characters, like sometimes they'd introduce a character you really liked, like say Tremor or Curse, and then you wouldn't see those characters again for like 100 issues. So he didn't really bring the same characters back over and over and over again. Now when it comes to She-Spawn, I don't know if she ever appeared in the comic books up until pretty much the last year and a half when I started collecting them again, and they formed the team, the Scorched. I think the character originated in the original toy line, because basically what McFarlane was doing is after they made a couple of toys of the regular Al Simmons Spawn, every wave of figures they would add new side characters, but they wanted to do variations of Spawn, and they started doing characters like Techno Spawn, Pirate Spawn, Mandarin Spawn, Gunslinger Spawn, and these characters were just versions of Spawn, but they weren't based on anything in the comic book. And She-Spawn, that's how she started it. So originally, the first She-Spawn figure, it had a solid face mask. You couldn't see her mouth and lips like you can on this version. And she had a rooted hair ponytail like a Barbie doll that came out of her top of her head. And so that was the look of She-Spawn. A couple years later, they made a She-Spawn version 2, which had a very similar look, but the figure was updated with better articulation and all that sort of stuff. And that's the thing. McFarlane then did take some of the characters he created as toys and integrated them into the comic book later, but I don't recall if he ever did that with She-Spawn. However, this character, so who She-Spawn is under the mask, I guess we'll say, is a character named Jessica Priest, and she's been part of the Spawn comic books for quite some time. Without getting too much into it, when the Spawn comic book first came out, the premise was that Spawn was a soldier, he got killed, and he came back from the dead, and he found out that the guy that killed him was this character named Chapel, which was from another Image book called Youngblood, created by Rob Liefeld. So this was their way of tying Youngblood to Spawn in the early days of Image. I think they wanted to have a shared universe. However, that shared universe didn't really pan out as some of the Image creators left the company and whatever. So then they kind of retconned that, and instead of Chapel being the guy that killed Al Simmons before he became Spawn, they changed that to Jessica Priest, and that was the character they went with in the live-action movie. And so she was featured a few times in the Spawn comic books as this kind of mercenary, but only recently has she come back, and she's been given the powers of She-Spawn, and now she's one of Al Simmons' teammates. And don't ask me to explain exactly how that all happened. Even though I read the comic books, I'd still hesitate to try and explain where her Spawn powers came from and why she's fighting with Al as an ally and all that stuff. But that doesn't really matter. We're here to talk about the figure, and this figure is cool. I was not interested in She-Spawn when they first made her in those first two figures, so I didn't buy either of them. And I was never interested in Jessica Priest as a character. That never really worked for me. And when Jessica Priest showed up in the comic books recently and they turned her into She-Spawn, I was still not impressed. I was like, oh, I don't like this outfit. It seems kind of silly. I wish they had kind of went with something new. But I don't know. In just the few issues that I've read since she got this look, it's kind of grown on me. And I actually really dig this look now. And I think this figure pulls it off really well. Like, I like the open nose and mouth. I think that looks a lot better than the full closed, like, Spawn face. This kind of differentiates her from Spawn and from Gunslinger Spawn. I don't know why she has this big flowing orange hair as She-Spawn, because she has short dark hair when she's Jessica Priest. But I think this looks cool. I like the way it's sculpted. It seems very McFarlane-esque. He always draws big hair and big flowing capes and all that stuff. He goes a little overboard when it comes to that stuff. So I really like the way this looks. It's very McFarlane. This outfit here with the big skull on her shoulder, the chains hanging off it, the chain as a belt. Like, this is all, it's a pretty cool design. Like, it's similar to Spawn, so you can definitely see how it's referencing the original Spawn costume, but at the same time, it's kind of its own thing. The little weird, like, half leather jacket is a little strange, but again, I kind of like it. You get a lot of detail here with the studs on the collar, the spikes on the sleeves. I think it makes it look a lot better than if she was just wearing this kind of maroon bodysuit. That mini jacket really adds to it. And I like the one boot here too. Like, that's pretty cool looking design. The spikes on there, and then she's got little kind of like anklets on her boots here, again with little spikes on them, and they're painted. There's like a silver wash over there to bring out the detail. So yeah, very cool. I like this figure quite a bit. The articulation, I don't know if I'll bother going into detail, but you can see here she's got the double jointed knees, so she should be able to get her legs pretty far back. She's also got ankle articulation. Her legs can kick out to the side quite well, kick forward quite well. You can see how this crotch piece here is like a softer rubber, which allows the legs to come up like that. It's almost like a skirt piece. She's got a joint at the waist and a joint kind of just above just under the breastplate there. Double jointed elbows. So again, she should be able to have a good range of movement on her arms. Articulated wrists, ball jointed head. So yeah, pretty standard stuff. So I guess the main thing we have to talk about with her is her accessories, since she's a deluxe figure and comes with a bunch of accessories. The first accessory you see here is the standard display base. I talked about this in my last video. All three of the figures I reviewed come with the exact same kind of plain black display base. And I didn't mention this actually when I was reviewing the Violator. The only accessory the Violator came with was also the same little black display base, which seems almost comical because the idea of a display base is that your figure will stand up on a shelf and won't fall over. And as you can see when I bring this guy back in here, he's pretty big and heavy, and I don't think this one little peg is going to hold him in place. If he decides to topple over, he's going to go. Anyway, as far as other accessories go, she has got this gun here. So you can see it's got this chain all wrapped around it. I think it looks like that would just come right off, actually. I don't know if that's really attached to it anywhere. Yeah, you could just take that right off of that gun. So I'm not sure what that's all about. It looks cool, I guess, wrapped around the gun, but it is very easily removable. And that's almost kind of a nuisance because if I choose to display her with this gun, I can imagine this chain is probably going to be sliding off of the gun all the time. But anyway, cool looking gun. I don't know if that's based on anything real world. I don't really care about that stuff, but it's a pretty serious looking gun. This gun here, maybe even more serious. Very big, very long. It's got this red strap around there. I don't know what that's all about. But otherwise, there's not really any paint apps. It's cast in this kind of dark gray, and it's got like a silver wash over it. It looks good. But, yeah. And I'll put these in her hands a little bit later so you can see kind of how she holds everything here. So here's a smaller gun, but still quite a big gun. Again, it's got that same red wrapping around. I don't know if it's real world or not. It looks kind of science fiction-y to me. And then we've got this kind of cool... I called it a sword earlier, but I think it's more of a knife maybe, or somewhere in between. I don't know. But it's got some cool painted detail, and the fact that you've got silver, red, and gold on there, so that's cool. They didn't skimp on the painted detail there. And then she's got this big crazy axe thing with this pretty brutal looking handle that you could really bludgeon somebody with. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. Again, I would have been content if she only came with one or two of these weapons and she only cost $30. I didn't really need all this extra stuff. Maybe, you know, I don't know if that would work with other figures. If I wanted to say give Cobra Commander this gun, I don't know if it's to scale with him or not, but you know, you could probably use that with some of your other 6-inch figures. But anyway, let's oh, and the last thing I guess I should mention is so she has this open hand too. So right now she's got two gripping hands. So this hand might work, you know, just if you want her, I don't know, just making hand motions, but also maybe with some of these larger guns, if she's gripping the handle in that hand, maybe this second hand will allow her to kind of hold the, you know, the barrel of the gun in her hand or something. Anyway, let's check this stuff out. So here she is with her bladed weapons in hand. So she holds onto those quite well. The weapons, at least these ones, are kind of soft rubber, like they've got quite a bit of give to them. So you got to be careful you don't warp them. But that did help me get them into her hands. Her hands are quite stiff, and if you have I would probably recommend using like a hairdryer or something to soften up her hands before you try wrestling with these things and getting them in there. I didn't really want to go upstairs and grab my wife's hairdryer at this particular point in time, but fortunately the weapons were gummy enough that I was able to get them in her hands. I'm not sure if the guns will be the same, but I'm going to try to arm her up with some guns now. So here she is with some ridiculously sized guns. I'm actually impressed that she's able to hold this larger gun up. You know, it's not forcing her arm down, so her arm is actually, the joint is tight enough to hold that gun, even though you can see it is pretty heavy and it kind of wants to pull her arm down. But yeah, she holds on to those all right, and that wasn't, they weren't difficult to get in and out of her hands. So I guess the last piece here would be this guy. And yeah, she holds that okay too. It's a little It's kind of heavy, so you might have to adjust her weight a little bit to make sure she can hold it all right. But yeah, so these are some pretty cool weapons. So even though she's only got 2 hands and she doesn't have any holsters or anywhere else to store the extra weapons, you know, you might want to stick them in Al Simmons' hands or somebody else. Because yeah, they're pretty cool weapons. It's kind of a shame to just throw them into my spare parts bin. But anyway, so that's, I think, all I have to say about She-Spawn. Okay, so that was my review of my latest Spawn figures, She-Spawn and Violator. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and please leave me some comments below. I'll be back soon with another video. So thank you very much for watching. Have a good one. Ciao.